how did you find out about the villages? And then when did you start, the wheels start turning about doing like a documentary about this, like they call it Disney World for, retired people,
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I think a lot of it came from, I was fascinated by these ideas of how, what I think is like a deeply held like American desire to cocoon yourself in sort of a bubble and a fantasy land. I just made a documentary short about a guy living on a cruise ship. He was a retiree, and uh, he had been living on cruise ships for 20 years. So I was just fascinated that when I made that film, I think that was sort of the this idea of retirees escaping reality to live in, their own kind of created utopias. And right around that time, I had heard of the villages growing up. I went to go to college in Boston, came back to Florida to make that film, the cruise film. And right around that time, I had heard about another statistic of the villages, that this was a place that suddenly had become one of the fastest growing cities in the country. 120,000 people deciding to live in this sort of nostalgic world designed to remind them of their childhood. And I was just fascinated. I saw like a marketing video. That was that honestly looked somewhere between like an unintentional David Lynch Blue Velvet opening and like, the scenes in Edward Scissorhands where you have this, portraits of suburban life. And I just was like, man, this is, I want to make a film that, it'd be amazing if I could make a film that kind of channels the language of these marketing material videos and, is able to inhabit the fantasy and then kind of call it into question by either the way we cast it or the way, or sort of, the kind of topics we explore with it.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the cast. I mean, you narrowed it down to four people. Was it difficult to like figure out because there's so many people? Obviously, you mentioned that live there.
I mean, yeah, it was it was intense. It was probably one of the hardest things to do. I feel like, especially in a documentary, it's like so much. You live and die by the stories you follow, and beyond being like extremely grateful to the four subjects that are at the heart of the film. For a while we were following a lot more. We cast a much wider net. We were following probably 12, 15 people. You see some of little glimpses of their stories, maybe not their stories, but just you see a little bit of them in the beginning of the film when you have like a chorus of characters that are talking about how the villages is this kind of desired utopia and
Yeah,
how great it is. And
all
we
the different
certainly were
activities
following a
you
number
do
of those
there.
people who kind of had remarkable stories about living in a place like that, how great the place was. um, but I knew that a film would have to, our film, if it was going to kind of engage with crack or attempt to sort of pierce the artifice of the community, that we would have to find subjects that offer different perspectives. So I ended up, very naturally, the subjects I found: Barbara I met on my first day in the villages, Dennis I met my second or third week before we even were shooting at a singles club. And then Reggie I met while we were filming with someone else. He just kept kind of appearing in our shots. And then I met Anne after meeting Reggie. I knew that there was something kind of great about making a film from the perspective of like a married couple, a widow and a bachelor, something that kind of even more formally dealing with relationships and how that kind of how the interplay of those stories with the contrast of a place where everyone's having fun all the time.
Did you like rent or buy a golf cart to go around and shoot while
I
you're there?
did. Yeah, no, we definitely did. Sometimes, we were living in the Airbnbs while we were like throughout the, making of this film. I was, like we lived in like 4 or 5 different houses in the villages proper while on each trip. And some of those houses, excuse me, had golf carts. So, it was fun. It was honestly a little it was harder to shoot in than you would imagine, just because they have like, they have their own golf cart roads, and it's like a lot of drivers who no longer drive cars and are driving golf carts are not the best drivers in
Oh,
the world, and a lot of them are very aggressive. So it's intense.
I can only
Yeah.
imagine. Wow. Well, I guess can you explain some of the history of how the village was? I know you explained it in the film, but for my viewers out there, some background on it, because it's very fascinating how it was formed in the mid '80s, I think it started.
Yeah, it was. So, the the place is interesting because I think, before the Villages was around, there was, the Del Webb communities like Sun City in Arizona, which was like at the time, like, the biggest retirement community. And it was, I think, probably one of the first. There was Youngstown before Sun City. There was a lot of these kind of, experiments in these sort of retirement communities that were more utopian in a way, that had their own nomenclature, had their own golf carts, and had this whole vision that wasn't specific to the Villages. When the Villages popped up, it was in the 80s. Harold Schwartz, a businessman, he bought a bunch of cheap land in the middle of nowhere outside of Orlando, swampland. He initially started by, creating a community that was mostly just RVs and trailers, like a kind of an upscale trailer park. And I think probably around, I think the middle of the 80s, he had this idea, or early 90s, to do something that was, I think he was just obsessed with Disney World, and he wanted to find a way to Disneyfy the retirement experience. So he hired a design firm that worked with Disney World and Universal Studios. He created all these fake, kind of a fake history for the community that had been around for hundreds of years. He created 3 different town squares. Each of them had their own different history and own different mythology behind them. A Spanish kind of colonial themed square, a Western themed town square, and then like a town square that looked like it was from the 1950s, like a kind of a waterfront, literally looks exactly like the one in Truman Show. So it was a lot of that. And that was kind of the origins of the place.
I'm always fascinated by especially documentary filmmakers, because it's a long process to, obviously find a subject, shoot, edit, do the film festival circuit, talk about when you actually originally started, the time frame for this whole thing you'd made.
It was a journey. We started making this film. It took about, I'd say, off and on 18 months from when principal photography started and when it stopped, and then certainly I think about almost a year for the edit of the film. But I didn't set out to make a feature-length film. That was kind of something I kind of accidentally fell into. Honestly, I thought I was making a short film
That happens
at
a lot when
first.
I interview people for their documentaries. I started as
Totally.
a short film and it turned into a feature.
I feel like that's probably the natural way of it
Yeah.
happening. But if I had told myself I was probably making a feature, I don't know if I would have. I think I probably would have been too intimidated to actually have done it if I went into it thinking that was kind of going to be what was going to happen here.
Lastly, but before I have the whole COVID thing, were you thinking about doing like a premiere red carpet up in the Villages for this, or how did people feel about this film up there?
It's interesting. I mean, I'm starting to hear more, reactions from obviously the subjects of the film. They've seen the film several times at this point, but the people who aren't in the film, who are just learning about it, have interesting reception. It's an interesting reaction. I think some people are offended by the appearance of it. I think the trailer maybe gave some people a false impression of what the film actually is. Despite I love the trailer personally, but to each their own. But it'll be interesting. Any official sort of kind of unfortunately all their movie theaters in the Villages are currently defunct just because of COVID. We're planning to do some sort of version of a drive-in, a golf cart drive-in for Villages residents. So hopefully we can make it happen. We're still sort of figuring it all out right now, but be on the lookout. If it does, you'll know, hopefully.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, everyone, check it out. Magnolia Pictures will be releasing Some Kind of Heaven, amazing documentary film that follows the 4 people in the Villages. Comes out on demand January 15th. You can go to the website for more details, somekindofheaven.com. Thank you so much. Well, if you do that golf cart drive-in, please post it on all social media for the movie. I can't wait to see that. So
thank you so much, Stephen. It was great to talk to you.